Employers need resources and tools to better understand, how do I support my employees? How do I support my organization? What skills should I be thinking about? What kind of workforce should I be building? And that's why tools like the EV hiring guide are so critical.
And what I really appreciate about the hiring guides is the success profiles and the career pathways show people the path into manufacturing.
Welcome back to the Work Intelligence Lab podcast. I'm Carla Fletcher, and this is where data starts the conversation and insights take it further. Employers who are offering professional development are seeing a 34% higher retention rate, but more importantly, becoming 17% more productive. That's not just a stat, it's a strategy. This episode unlocks how continuous learning can drive performance, helping people stay relevant and organizations stay competitive. To explore that, I'm handing over to my colleague, Rebekah Kowalski. Rebekah, over to you.
I'm your host, Rebekah Kowalski. I lead strategic workforce partnerships at ManpowerGroup. With me today, Liz Stuck and Berardino Baratta from MXD. First question, who is MXD, Berardino?
So MXD stands for Manufacturing Times Digital. We are the Department of Defense's Digital Manufacturing and Cybersecurity Manufacturing Innovation Institute. That's a mouthful, but what it really means is we were stood up 11 years ago to help strengthen U.S. manufacturing by ensuring that we have a cybersecure and digitally enabled foundation to support making manufacturing as strong as possible.
That's fantastic and so incredibly important. As our audience knows, manufacturing is the underpinning of every economy. We have to make things in order to live and survive and thrive. And so there's so much there in terms of making sure manufacturing is really top notch in the US, isn't it?
It is. And what's important is that it's not just about technology. Anytime we tell people we're an innovation institute, they're like, oh, what cool technology are you working on? It's about the combination of the right technology, but the right skills in the workforce so that you bring the both together and you get the benefit. Without both sides of it, you don't get the full benefit of advanced manufacturing.
And that's really the magic, right?
Yeah.
The technology component and the workforce that has to be brought along, which brings me to you, Liz, because what does MXD learn? Tell me about that.
That is the workforce program at MXD, where we are looking at everything from what kind of workers do we need, what kind of skill sets are going to be necessary for the adoption of these technologies, how are we going to get training and curriculum developed, how do we get it into the hands of learners, how do we get it in the hands of employers who are trying to upskill their workforce, how do we make learning more accessible?
So a manufacturing skills gap in the US, can you give us some sense, Liz, of how big that gap is?
So within the US alone, manufacturers are trying to fill more than 2 million jobs by the end of 2030.
Wow, 2 million jobs by 2030. That's incredible.
And just because of a skills shortage, not just a people shortage, it's the skills those individuals have.
Wow, that's crazy. And I hope everyone understands how significant those numbers are. And that tells me, just how important those skill up programs you were talking about really are, why MXD Learn is so vital.
Right. We're not going to be able to just recruit the people we need as new workers. We're going to have to look at what we have currently in the workforce and find ways to bring new skill sets to them to upskill that workforce.
That's fantastic. Berardino, I also noticed that MXD is the National Center for Cybersecurity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so 6 years ago now, we were set up as the National Center for Cybersecurity and Manufacturing. We're here to really secure the supply chain. So if you think about U.S. manufacturing, 98.5% are small or medium, less than 500 employees, and 75% are less than 20. They need help. They don't have the cyber resources they need. So we were stood up to help strengthen and secure that cyber channel. Now, during the pandemic, manufacturing went from the number 9 targeted industry, so banking, insurance, those things were number 1 and 2 and 3, to number 1 and has remained number 1 for 3 years in a row. So not only do we have, the bulk of U.S. manufacturing does not have the resources to be able to secure themselves properly, but on top of that, they're being attacked more and more and more every day, and large and small are being attacked equally. So we're really there to help strengthen the weakest chain in the cybersecurity links. And by strengthening them, we're ultimately strengthening the entire nation's manufacturing capability.
What's wild to me is that on the one hand, you are advancing all of these incredible digital technologies to modernize manufacturing. But as you're doing that, you're also trying to figure out how to protect
Yeah.
So that's a pretty broad remit and super important. And I'm thinking that probably means there's quite a lot of focus on how to create more pathways for individuals that are interested in cybersecurity, particularly in manufacturing. Is that something that you're doing inside of MXD Learn?
Absolutely. In fact, we have requests from manufacturers we work with, some of them small, but some of them quite large, where they're asking us, how do I bring a foundational basic level of cyber knowledge to my workforce? They're not even looking at cyber specialists. They just need sort of a baseline, a foundational level for their workers so that they can starting to build that awareness, starting to have the tools they need to be able to protect the equipment on the factory floor, protect the workers, protect the company.
Yeah, so incredibly vital. You can be competitive, but if you're porous, if you're very vulnerable to attacks, you cannot be competitive in design or production or distribution. So very, very important. And I know Manpower Group has been really excited to partner with you on starting to look at that workforce and look at how we advance people. It's so very important. And now there's something really new and exciting that's coming out. So tell us a little bit about how you ended up looking at electronic vehicles.
Yeah, so when you'd think like as a manufacturing institute focused on innovation, EVs is an industry, it's not really our focus. But when you think about it, what is it going to take to have that industry in the US, right? We're going to have to strengthen our supply chains. We're not only going to have the prime manufacturers, but all the suppliers that come behind that. All of those suppliers today have to figure out how they pivot from their current markets into those new markets. All of those suppliers are going to have to upskill their workforce to make sure they have the right skills in order to meet the needs of the EV. And then EV really is this transforming industry. It's like the internal combustion engine vehicles. It's opening up a whole new story of like, how do we approach things? So it's not just the commercial side. We're a Department of Defense institute, and the Department of Defense is looking at EV vehicles to how do they manage their fleet of vehicles to make them the most efficient and most solution. So we looked at it holistically, and it just made a lot of sense for us to focus on this space, and really excited to have worked with Manpower on this project.
It is spectacular. Of course, plot spoiler for everyone. I've seen it. It's fantastic. You'll have to check it out. So Liz, as with all the research that's been done in your workforce readiness guides, we see that you transcend just a specific area. Can you tell me why it's important to look at these feeder areas and interconnection points? Because I think that's really fascinating. I think our audience will be interested in that as well.
So we take a very comprehensive approach with all of these guides. And as Berardino was mentioning earlier, we're looking at all the pieces that are impacted as we look at the EV sector. It's not just about the vehicle and the parts and the components that make up the vehicle. It's about the workforce, certainly, but all the pieces that go into that. Is it the way we think about charging stations and the maintenance of those? Is it the way we set up parking lots to make sure they can support vehicles? There's a lot of different aspects of this that have to be considered, and it's critical that we look at all of those, or we underscope the magnitude and we don't get a good understanding of the skills that are going to be necessary within the workforce.
I think in one of the conversations we had around this, we talked about things like infrastructure and just simple things like parking lots. Charging stations are maybe one that people think of readily, but what about a car wash, for instance? What does maintenance look like? And so I think it's wonderful that you look that broadly, because it also shows there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for individuals who are looking to upskill and be in a very interesting, fast-moving space.
Well, and when you start to look at these things broadly, all of a sudden, you start to connect to other areas, other technology adjacencies. It quickly became apparent in this work how some of the skills and the roles that we were seeing within the EV space had ties to things that we had seen in our cybersecurity workforce readiness guides, our digital workforce readiness guides. The skill sets required are not that different when you start to get to the edges, and that's a good thing. That means that it's not going to be as difficult as we might think for one person in a current position to move into another position to support a workforce need.
I think that's great, because it's all about adaptability, right? It's all about the ability also for people to pivot and be versatile as it relates to their career. And that's great news for industry that's in such a shortage as you've described.
So if you think about also from the supply chain, right? The hiring guide as a workforce readiness guide allows a manufacturer to consider how they can pivot their organization to take their existing workforce, upskill them with the incremental skills that they need, and shift the entire organization to potentially from the classical manufacturing for, say, automobiles to now they can go into EV automobiles. And it allows them to pivot. If we think about our domestic supply chain, we are going to have to pivot some of our existing suppliers into these new markets in order to continue to have that domestic capability. If not, we're going to continue to lose that capability to other nations. So it's important to look at this from both the manager, employer side, as well as the worker side. If we can get both of them to realize the benefit of these readiness guides, it can really shift their thinking.
What you're talking about, and it's so exciting for me to think about that. In the US, it's a workforce strategy for industry, right? And that is what is needed, particularly when we have such a chronic shortage. You really have to think about, as I like to say, shopping from your own closet. How are you going to actually help people retool, help an organization pivot? And then for individuals who maybe have never thought of these careers, get excited because there's a tremendous amount of opportunity out there. I mean, who doesn't want to work on that next generation military vehicle that's electric? I mean, it's just a different kind of opportunity. So Liz, with all of this research, it sounds like there were probably some really fascinating pieces. What do you think were some of the biggest critical insights you got out of it?
So it reinforced what we've seen in some of our other workforce readiness guides around the need for adaptability and agility. We're not really in an environment anymore where you go to school, you learn a skill, you apply that in the workforce, and you maybe build a few other skills along the way, but by and large, that's sort of the career that you're in. We're in a place now where new technologies are coming online so quickly that we are really in need of continuous learning and upskilling for workers. And this guide just reinforced that. When we look at the scope and the skill sets required and the breadth, it's clear that we're going to need to be able to continue to support a very agile and adaptable workforce.
Fantastic. Berardino, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, when the first time Liz mentioned that years ago, the thing that triggered for me was, how do people learn today, right? They go to the internet, they go to YouTube, they go to Reddit, they go to a website, and then they take that nugget of information and they go put it into practice. And then they come back and they get more information and they go back and put it into practice. And Liz always calls it micro-learnings, micro-certifications. It's that continuous learning. Like, we want to create a workforce that doesn't finish their schooling, start working, and then they work for the rest of their career. But they're constantly learning and growing. And that's really the way that makes the worker the most productive, effective, and valuable resource that they are. But also, it just uplifts all of manufacturing in the U.S.
For certain. And we're talking about an evolutionary force and a scale force as manufacturers modernize. And we have a gap that we're trying to fill in at the same time we're trying to move a large number of organizations and people quite rapidly. What's the key? What's the key takeaway you'd want everyone listening to this podcast to have from this, both for those who are looking at their workforce inside of their organization, and for the individual who's thinking to themselves, where do I play? It feels like everything is moving so quickly.
Want to take that first?
So there are two parts to this that I think are critical. The first is that we really need to continue to see support from industry and managers, support of continuous learning and education. We hear periodically from managers who say, I'm not going to invest in training for my employees because when they leave, they take that with them. We really need to shift the mindset into one of actually providing educational opportunities and professional development opportunities for workers. We know through a series of studies that employers who offer professional development to their employees have a 34% higher retention rate than those who do not.
Wow.
And so it's important that we provide accessible training on the right skill sets for workers, and that we have employers bought into that process. But we cannot expect employers to do all of this on their own. It's too much for them to take on their own. And that's why tools like the EV hiring guide are so critical. Employers need resources and tools to better understand, how do I support my employees? How do I support my organization? What skills should I be thinking about? What kind of workforce should I be building? So we need to keep putting tools and resources out there for both employers and employees, but we also really need that support and that motivation from managers to provide the space necessary for workers to continue to learn.
You know, it's interesting. We've done a lot of research with our employees around the world and our talent barometer and some of our surveys to understand what it is that workers want. And one of the things that they want so clearly is a career path for me.
Yeah.
Training and development opportunities. They are so very willing to participate in that with an employer, but they so rarely have the clarity because it is not always apparent how the tech adoption roadmap of an organization is impacting on the individual. And so what I hear you saying is these guides are actually quite helpful for organizations who need to jumpstart articulating to people, this is how things are moving and that there is a place for you. Because we know from our research that not only do they want this, but when they have it, they are much more likely to stay. And so I think what you're doing is so incredibly important.
Yes, I think that it goes along with what Berardino said earlier. We can't just focus on the technology. If we just focus on the technology, we won't be able to implement it, and we won't see the success and the outcomes that we anticipate with this advanced technology. We have to do the workforce in parallel. I would argue maybe even ahead, because if we start technology and then bring the workforce along, we're never going to get there.
Very true.
Yeah, and a piece to add to that is like when you think about the workforce, the traditional average US manufacturing employee is not who it is today. Like it's changed. And recently I was reading up on World War II when basically, men went off to war, we still had to make things. Yes. And women represented 65% of the manufacturing workforce. And they filled the gap, and they were welders and riveters and machinists, and they filled all the roles that traditionally might have been considered a man. Why not do that again? Let's bring women up to 50% of the manufacturing workforce. Our workforce challenges, they'll be a thing of the past. And what I really appreciate about the hiring guides is the success profiles and the career pathways show people the path into manufacturing. Because for most people, they don't know where to start, but they're not even considering it. So let's open the minds, let's get people thinking about it. And these are great tools to help people figure out how to make that transition.
Fantastic. I would agree. They are terrific tools, and everyone who's listening to this should check them out. So any last words that you would like to share on what we've been talking about today?
So whether it's EV or any manufacturing environment, like technology will continue to advance. It'll continue to evolve. It'll continue to move forward. We have to consider the workforce as a continuing evolving resource as well. Create the environment of continuous learning so that they move in lockstep with the technology adoption. That's my closing thoughts. That's what will achieve the success that we need in this nation to have a strong and resilient manufacturing base.
I love that point, the technology and the human moving together.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Liz, your last thoughts?
We can only move them together if we have the people we need. So it's critical that we continue to introduce people to manufacturing careers, demonstrate that these are not the careers they're thinking of. It's not the perception that used to exist of sort of these dark or sometimes dangerous workplaces. These are innovative facilities with cutting edge technology. And we have to continue to show that to the public, to elementary age students, to middle schoolers, to high schoolers, even to those who are in the workforce looking for a new job. We need to be able to show them what this looks like, give them access to the training and skills that they're going to need to be able to jump into those jobs. If we can't do that, can't close the worker gap, we cannot remain competitive as a manufacturing sector in the U.S.
Wonderful. I want to thank both of you for joining us today. This has been fantastic. We will make sure the audience gets access to all of these wonderful resources you've been talking about. It is so important, right? If the workforce doesn't move, none of us can move and advance. Industry cannot move and advance. Society cannot move and advance. So you've done a great job of talking us through that today. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you out in the audience today for joining us for the Workforce Intelligence Lab podcast.